שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יקקה וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך מעתה ועד עולם. שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל.
Shalom, shalom everybody, and welcome to the World Alliance of Qara'im podcast. My name is Hakham Melech Rahmiel ben Yaakov of the World Alliance of Qara'im, and we have a very special and very interesting guest with us here today. We're going to be speaking with George Elvira, who characterizes himself as a Torah-keeping Christian. So let me give you a little bit of a blurb about him. So George is a Torah-observant Christian, and he runs the YouTube channel Hebrew Hill, to which this is being live streamed, as well as to my channels at the moment. And George believes that all people that want to be in covenant with God must keep the laws of Moses, must keep the law of Moses. He is the head of the Ashrei Fellowship in northern Idaho. The stated goal of which is to keep the commandments of God, magnify the Torah, and make it honorable in the spirit of Yeshua's teachings. And while he is not busy doing his important work within the world of religion, he works in finance, and he's the proud father of 6 children, together with his wife of 14 years. He's also an avid homesteader, and we've linked his Instagram account if you want to check out more about his homesteading. So that's a quick blurb. We're going to be having a discussion about Karaism in general, about Torah observance in general. We're going to be focusing on a lot of things that we are in agreement with, and I'm sure we'll talk and focus a bit on some of the things that we disagree over in a very friendly and respectful manner. But here we go. George, would you like to introduce yourself and add anything that you would like to add?
Yeah, thank you, Melech. I appreciate your introduction, and thank you so much for taking time to have a conversation with me. I came to the belief in God at the age of 30 after being an atheist for my life. And at the age of 30, I essentially called out to God through Jesus. At the time, that's how I knew him. And I said, God, if you are real, please heal me from this addiction, and I will serve you all the days of my life. And God was very faithful to honor that promise to me. So now my job, as I see it, is to honor the promise that I made to him. And in my heart, it's been put in my heart to do what Yeshua said, right? I know that he and a lot of people take that and kind of go in different directions. My understanding that I believe that I've been given is that Yeshua taught the Torah, and his goal was to magnify the Torah and make it honorable. And this is stated on the Sermon on the Mount, where he says, whoever therefore keeps and teaches even the least of these commandments shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. So my sole duty in life is to be an example of Yeshua, to be a good father, and to communicate the hope that there is in God's Torah and God's word. And I think that is a universal thing that people can adopt and truly find meaning for their lives, and truly find hope, because I believe we're very much so lacking that in our day and age.
Very nice. So as a Christian, so many Christians do not believe that they are required to observe the Torah, right? Standard
Correct.
Christian doctrine would say, or at least used to say, that the Torah was the law was nailed to the cross, right, along with Jesus / Yeshua. So how did you come to the realization that as a Christian that you were meant to keep the Torah?
So I was heavily involved in the church that I was in formerly. We were in a lot of the ministries. We do a lot of the street evangelism, feeding the homeless. Like I said, I still kind of have the same heart, where I know that the Bible is the true hope for humanity, right? And so my heart was to help homeless people and spread the word and say, look, there's hope in God, and there's redemption, and you don't have to live this way. Give your life over to God, right? So initially, that was always my goal, because I was addicted to alcoholism, and I found complete peace after believing in God, and I wanted to share that as well with others. And then so we were doing these street ministries, and one of the guys that would jump was in the ministry with us. Eventually came back, and through a series of events, shared with me that we should be keeping the Torah, shared with one of my friends as well. His name is Simon, that we should be keeping the Torah. And we both looked into it. And long story short, after 6 months, for me, at least, of battling with it and saying, no, we don't have to do these things. These are nailed to the cross. These are a burden. These are things that are not applicable to us because we're in some new covenant. After studying it out, I found no inconsistency with the Old Testament. So I believe that Yeshua, as I've come to know him since then, is fully compatible with the Torah and doesn't contradict anything. If anything, what contradicts the Torah is going to be the man-made doctrines that we've added, like you said, right? Nailed to the cross. That is a doctrine that would utterly contradict with the Torah that states that nothing shall be added or taken away from this Torah. And so once I realized that the Torah was the foundation for all scripture, the Bible became one solid story, one consistent story to me, where nothing was done away with, and I should read it with that understanding.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what would you say to Christians who might claim, well, Paul preached that non-Jews don't need to keep at least parts of the law? For instance, he made a decision regarding circumcision that non-Jews don't have to be circumcised. How would you reconcile your belief system with, let's say, again, more standard Christianity, where they would maybe turn to the words of Paul to say that if you're not part of Israel, if you're not Jewish, then you don't need to keep these laws?
Yeah, believe the answer is summed up in the New Testament. There's a verse in 2 Peter where it says that the writings of Paul are hard to understand and the lawless twist them to their own destruction. And we see that being played out in the book of Acts, where people are saying, Paul, you're here, and people are going to say, what shall we do here? Because they believe that you're teaching them not to observe the commandments of our fathers given by Moses. And what shall we do? And Paul says, they recommend to him to essentially take a Nazirite vow and offer some sacrifices and do the entire process that is outlined in the book of Numbers in order to show that he does keep the law. So what I believe is being conflated there is tradition and law. Paul was teaching, I believe, against the traditions as developed by Pharisaism, and then people aren't able to differentiate between Torah and tradition. And when Paul says you don't have to keep this certain tradition, for example, you don't have to be worried about eating something that's common versus which is an additional level than Torah-based unclean, right? So he is teaching against these, I would say, added rabbinic traditions, and they don't know how to differentiate that. So it gets all lumped into Torah, and then Paul becomes antinomian, which is the Greek word to say anti-Torah. And so I believe that he is not saying any of those things. I believe he's simply teaching Gentiles how to keep the Torah, and he would be very good at it because he understands Pharisaism very well because he was a Pharisee. So all of the things that he is saying are pertinent to their time. So like, for example, circumcision, right? Circumcision, it sounds very much so like he's teaching against circumcision. But what I think he means by circumcision is not literal biblical Genesis 17 circumcision. I think he's teaching against the rabbinic conversion, also referenced as circumcision, just shorthand for that conversion. So when there's a point in one of the books of Acts, it's in one of the chapters in the book of Acts, where he says that he went with one of the apostles and they did not feel compelled to become circumcised. But then later on, he has somebody else circumcised. So which one is it? Like, is circumcision abhorrent or is it not? And if it's an affront to God, why would he have somebody circumcised? It makes no sense unless circumcision means something else. And I believe that there's a lot of modern day, or not modern to us, but there's a lot of verbiage there that has evolved from the meaning that it was in the Torah, right? So circumcision becomes shorthand for conversion. And so Paul, I believe, doesn't teach against the Torah. If he did teach against circumcision, I would have no choice but to, I would say, get rid of his books, right? I would say he's not an apostle because we judge all things in accordance to the Torah. And if he's going to say, well, I am superior to God, and in the claims in Genesis 17, where he tells Abraham that this is an everlasting covenant forever. And if Paul says, no, I can undermine that in some book called Galatians, if that's truly the truth, then I would say that is not a good book to read, right? It's an antinomian book and it should be thrown out. But the reality is it's not the case. I think he's talking about man-made doctrines.
I see what you're saying. So essentially, to put it in a nutshell, your belief is that Paul is generally misunderstood, that he's not antinomian, and that where he speaks against circumcision is essentially a stand-in. It's the context, or contextually speaking, what you believe there is that he's really speaking about rabbinical style or Pharisaic style conversion, and not around about circumcision per se.
Absolutely. So there's a very famous verse in the book of Romans where he says, circumcision is nothing and uncircumcision is nothing but keeping the commandments of God. And it's like, well, which one is it, Paul? Like, the commandments of God one of the first ones is circumcision. And
Right.
so what is it? And if
I believe that's
circumcision,
Galatians 6:15, if I'm not mistaken. In fact, let me post the verse. But yes, go ahead.
yeah. So the point that I'm making is that circumcision, if it's so terrible, why does he point you to keep the commandments of God? And then in Christianity, you're forced to make up this kind of nebulous understanding of where laws come from. And you're supposed to either differentiate them into different categories, which the Torah never does, right? And it becomes extremely confusing, and it becomes subjective as to what becomes ceremonial law versus what becomes judicial law, or what becomes moral law. And it's like, well, which one is which? The Bible doesn't tell us to separate them in this way. And so Paul can't teach against these things, right? Jesus can't teach against these things. Nobody can teach against any of these. Ezekiel can't teach against any of these things, right? So no one can teach against the Torah. And so if there is a prophet that rises among you and tells you to follow other gods, teaching you to stray from the commandments of God, that prophet is not to be feared, and you're supposed to
put him to
stone
death.
him, put him to death.
That's right. I understand. Okay. So again, to kind of paraphrase what you're saying here, if it were to come down to it, that it turns out that Paul was actually teaching against keeping the commandments of the Torah, then you would be, in theory, you don't believe so in practicality, but in theory, you would be ready to toss him aside, say he's a false prophet, and rip his books right out of the canon of the New Testament. I understand.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be the case for all. But I have learned it over the years to be patient when it comes to biblical understanding, because a lot of the times you read something and it doesn't make any sense. And I think that all the things can be reconciled to the Torah. And if they can't, you just shelf them, and then later on you might get the answer, right? Because we're so far removed societally and just on the language level, because there's some words that are just not familiar. They have so many hapax legomenons where you have like one usage in the Bible, and you're like, well, what does that mean? I'm not sure.
Right.
So we can't draw these super hard lines, because there's some things that are a little bit opaque. And so we should major, as people would say, major in the majors. And I believe that is the things that are clearly stated, right? The 10 Commandments are very easy to understand. The things within the Torah, for the most part, are very easy to understand. But some of the more niche things where you have like, for example, in the Torah where it talks about oil, and or it's talking about a woman and divorcing a woman, and one of the and list the 4 things that have to be met to make a marriage. What am I trying to say?
It's okay. Take your time.
Yeah, to try to make a marriage valid, right? And it lists these 4 things. One of them is traditionally understood as like intercourse between a man and a woman, right? But that word could very much so mean oil, or like you're providing her day-to-day needs, or cosmetic needs and supplies, right? So it becomes a little challenging, because when you're going, well, what does that actually mean? I think we have to have patience and not just be like, well, I don't understand this, move on. I'm done with the Torah. I believe in shelving it, and then maybe later on additional knowledge comes through, and we're able to decipher some of those things that might be a little bit more difficult to understand.
And by the way, the verse you're talking about, let me just bring it up for 1 second. So that's in Exodus chapter 21. And we'll just post it in the English. Usually when I do my Torah studies, we focus on Hebrew, but since that's not the focus of our discussion today, then we'll just post the English. Just give me 1 second to bring it up. So that's Exodus chapter 21:10. I believe that's the verse you're referring to.
Yeah. Mishpatim is the best Torah portion ever. Just FYI.
They're all pretty good. Mishpatim is definitely a winner. It's definitely winning. And there's a whole context here, so I won't
Yeah.
post the whole context, but I will post the verse that you're talking about. So this is Exodus chapter 21, verse 10. And let me just put it in the comments. We can post it from there.
Thank you for finding it. This is three things.
Yeah. And there we go. Right. If he marries another woman, he must not deprive the first one of her food, clothing, and marital rights, which is generally understood as onata. It says in the Hebrew, her right to have sexual relations with her husband for pleasure.
Yeah.
And I'll just read. I won't post it because it's a bit long. But if a man sells his daughter as a servant, she is not to go free. This is in Exodus chapter 21, verse 7. If a man sells his daughter as a servant, and this is the NIV translation, by the way, which I actually think is a decent translation. There are some better ones, but it's pretty decent. If a man sells his daughter as a servant, she is not to go free as male servants do. If she does not please the master who has selected her for himself, he must let her be redeemed. He has no right to sell her to foreigners because he has broken faith with her. If he selects her for his son, and this is the case we're talking about in Exodus 21:10, he must grant her the rights of a daughter. If he, meaning the son, marries another woman, he must not deprive the first one of her food, clothing, and marital rights. In other words, this woman, Israelite daughter, is not to be treated as a slave woman. She's to be given the respect of a wife.
Amen.
Verse 11 says, if he doesn't provide her with these three things, she's to go free without any payment of money. Okay, so that's just to put it in perspective there.
And my understanding of that word "onah," right? It's only used once in the Bible overall. It's not used in Tanakh, right? It's not used in Torah elsewhere. And I've read articles and different studies by different scholars, and they'll say that in adjacent Semitic languages, that onah is similar to what they would use for oil, and that oil is a possible understanding, which then would make sense to me, because it would be food, clothing, and cosmetics, or essentially you have to support this woman, right? That's how I understand it.
Could be. It could be, yeah. Again, usually it's an interesting study, or that's an interesting interpretation. I have heard that before. The typical translation is, again, sexual cohabitation. I'm looking right now. I won't post it on the screen again, but I'm looking at the BDB, the Brown Driver Briggs, which is a very well recognized biblical Hebrew lexicon, and they translate it there as cohabitation. But sure, as you said, it's a hapaxagamenon. Yeah. And which, for those of you who don't know what that means a word that appears only once in the entire Tanakh. If you were to go to the concordance and look up that word, you would see only one occurrence of that word, and that would be here in Exodus 21:10. So therefore, and what George is pointing out, and correctly so, is that whenever you run across words that fall under the category of hapaxagamenon, there's always a question as to, I won't say always, but many times is the question as to what they mean, because we don't have multiple appearances of the word in various contexts to be able to kind of derive the underlying meaning of the word. So very interesting alternative. So you say it's related to oil, and you said you've read studies that therefore Exodus 21:10 would be interpreted as, if this man, the son, marries another woman, he must not deprive her of her food, her clothing, and her oil. In other words, her ointments. That was oil was and is to this day part of the makeup routine of many women. So that's what we're talking about. Okay, yeah, fair enough. It makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Okay, on to another subject. So now you define yourself, as you said, as a Torah observant Christian, and Torah observance can mean a lot of different things. There are a lot of Christians who define themselves as Torah observant who are followers of the rabbis. So I'm assuming that you're not, from everything you've said and what we've spoken about. Let me let you speak for yourself. Where do you fall into that overall spectrum or that overall rubric? Do you follow the rabbis? Do you reject the rabbis because Jesus made various tirades against the rabbis, such as in Matthew chapter 24, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
23, Matthew 23.
23, yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I it's funny because I would consider myself probably a Karaite Torah observer or Karaite Messianic, right? Because usually in our world, you're Messianic. That essentially means that there's a tie to some form of rabbinic tradition, and I completely reject all that. I interpret the New Testament as Yeshua rejecting the entire system that has been developed by the Pharisees, which later on will evolve into Rabbinic Judaism, right? So I believe he's undermining the very foundation of their belief system. And as you said, in Matthew 23 is probably the most apparent, where he says, the Pharisees sit on the seat of Moses, therefore whatever they bid you observe and do that, but do not do after their works. And then he goes on a list of a lot of their works. And he says that the acrostices to make proselytes, and they make them twice the child of hell. And so that doesn't sound to me like a favorable understanding of Phariseeism, right? It sounds to me like he is undermining the very foundation if he says that their system will lead you to become a child of hell. And why is that? Why does he say those things? Well, it's very interesting because on the Sermon on the Mount, he says, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Conventional Christian understanding would say that means that you can't even do it, because the Pharisees and the scribes were so good at keeping the Torah that there's no way you can do it. Therefore, it's just it's hyperbole, and it's really not meant to be taken in any way literally. The problem with that is obviously that the Father says that we're supposed to keep the Torah, right? So what does that mean? Well, in the book of John, he says that none of them, being the scribes and the Pharisees, keep the Torah. In the book of Mark, he says, well, do you nullify the word of God through your tradition? So he is constantly saying that their system results in lawlessness. And in what I believe he's telling us on the Sermon on the Mount, that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. That means you actually have to keep the Torah. You actually have to keep it in the true spirit of how it was meant to be kept. You're supposed to keep it with a heart, as Moses would describe a circumcised heart, and be stiff-necked no longer, right? So that's the kind of stuff that I believe Yeshua is telling us to do. He's pointing us back to the Torah and telling us to keep it with a whole heart. Similar to how I believe he talks about Joshua and Caleb, and he says that they had a different spirit in them.
Sure.
And
when
so,
and after the incident with the spies.
Correct, right? So that they seem to love God and want to do his will and have this faith that will believe him. And so I believe that's what he's saying. Yeshua is saying the same thing. He's just saying, go back to what the Torah says. And how does he want you to keep the Torah? And it's stated in multiple places in Deuteronomy, right? As with heart, mind, soul, strength, right? It's in Deuteronomy chapter 6. That's how he wants us to keep the Torah, not in some kind of legalistic way. And what I mean by legalistic is finding ways of loopholing yourself out of keeping commandments, out of actually doing what God truly intended for you to do. And I think that's what Rabbinic Judaism is a way of circumventing all of the things that God actually asked us to do as covenant members. So if he asks us to have a 7-year land rest, the Shemitah.
Leviticus chapter 25, for those of you who are following along at home.
Yeah. So if he asks us to do that, he doesn't mean, okay, rest your land and go rent land from a Gentile, and you can reap and sow their land all you want, as it says in the Mishnah, right? Because it's Gentile land and it's not Israelite land.
And as they do to this day in Israel, there's something called so every 7 years they do quote unquote a Shemitah year, sabbatical year, and they do exactly what you're saying. There's something called heter mechira, which means the dispensation or the ability to sell your land. Just as you said, they'll sell the land on paper to a non-Jew, to a goy, and then they'll just grow on that land as they do every other year. And I mean, who are we fooling here, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
It really is. It's kind of an insult to God, to Yahweh. It's how stupid do they think that God is? They can actually be getting away with this, and it really does give deep insight into the rabbinical mentality, which is that they believe that their laws, their legalisms, are superior to not only the written text, the text of the written Torah, text of the Tanakh, but also to God Himself. That by creating something, then God Himself will accept it. God Himself will follow along. They have a bit of a I'd say misplaced set of priorities or hierarchy, to say the least.
100%. Yeah. And
now, just to add to that, there's a movement in Israel. So the last Shemitah year, the last sabbatical year was, I think, 2 or 3 years ago. And believe it or not, there's a movement in Israel, and it's being spearheaded not by religious Jews in Israel, but believe it or not, by non-religious Jews who are very attached to the land, where they're actually deciding to keep the sabbatical year as written in the Torah. They're actually allowing their fields to lay fallow on that 7th year. And it's not being spearheaded, as far as I remember. I'd have to look it up again, but I remember researching it, and it's not being spearheaded by religious. In other words, religious in Israel means specifically rabbinically oriented, Orthodox Jewish, Orthodox Jews, but rather by secular, or at least on the surface secular, let's say more traditional Jews that are very connected to the land, and they have also said this is, that they've also seen through the lie. I mean, it's not too hard to see through if you're if you're a thinking person, and they've actually started keeping the sabbatical year as it's written in Leviticus chapter 25. So
amen. And I only know a lot of the traditions because I read the Mishnah a good amount, so I don't know what actually makes it into actual modern day practice, because the Mishnah is 1800 years old or so. And so I read this stuff and I'm like, wow, that is crazy that people would do that, because especially with this one here, right? Because if it's parallel to the Sabbath, right? The Sabbath, we're essentially sacrificing a day unto God, right? We're saying, I'm setting this day aside where I could sit here and generate income and not generate income on this day, and do the things of God that I believe he's called me to do. And so I'm essentially trusting that in those 6 days, I'm going to be able to provide for myself. Hence the parallel to the Shemitah, where you are supposed to be able to provide for yourself in 6 years and on the 7th year rest. Right. And so the circumvention is a lack of belief.
Yeah, it's a lack of faith. And a lack of belief, just like you said. And in fact, we have there's an explicit promise in Leviticus chapter 25. Let me just open it up for a second. This is really speaking about the Jubilee year, but let's see here. This is Leviticus chapter 25, we'll start in verse 18. I'll just read it aloud. Follow my decrees and be careful to obey my laws, and you will live safely in the land. Then the land will yield its fruit, and you will eat your fill and live there in safety. You may ask, what will we eat in the 7th year if we do not plant or harvest our crops? Verse 21, this is Leviticus 25:21. I will send you such a blessing in the 6th year that the land will yield enough for 3 years. While you plant during the 8th year, you will eat from the old crop and will continue to eat from it until the harvest of the 9th year comes in. So that's clearly speaking about, because the context here is just a bit before, it's speaking about the Jubilee year. So we know in the structure that's laid out in Leviticus 25. So we have a count of 49 years, right? Every 7th year is a sabbatical year, the Shabbat year, the Shemitah year, as they also call it, and then following the 49th year is the Jubilee year, and so that's another year where the land is meant to lay fallow. So actually, the 49th and the 50th year, the land lays fallow, and that's what these verses here are referring to. That's why it mentions the 8th and the 9th year.
Yeah.
Right. So, at any rate, yeah, it clearly states that it says in verse 21, I will send you such a blessing in the 6th year that the land will yield enough for 3 years. Right.
Yeah.
So that's the idea of, we first have to have the faith that this is going to happen, and then it will happen. if we don't have the faith, then we can never, even put Yahweh to the test. He's actually saying, right, that if you allow the land to rest, then I will bring the blessing upon you. And actually, we go one chapter later in Leviticus chapter 26, and we were just studying this yesterday. We do a weekly Torah study. So let's see if I can find this here. This is Leviticus chapter 26. Where is it? Just give me 1 second here. Yes. I remember my comment. Wait 1 second. Yes. So for the land will be given and will enjoy. Oh, wait. Just give me 1 second here. Let me see if I can find it. There it is. Okay. So this is Leviticus chapter 26. We'll start in verse 32. So it's speaking about, this is usually called the chapter of the blessing and the curse, or the reward and the punishment. So if the children of Israel disobey Yahweh, if they disobey the covenant, then Yahweh will bring upon Israel various punishments, and it states 4 times that the punishments, if Israel after the first wave of punishments doesn't listen, doesn't return to keep the covenant, then the punishments will increase 7-fold. And the Torah in Leviticus 26 says that 4 times, 7-fold, 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 and 7-fold again. Which, if I remember correctly, we did the math on that yesterday. It comes out to 2,401-fold. So,
oh wow, yeah,
yeah, pretty bad. That's not meant to be taken literally. It's not a mathematical statement. It's a poetic statement, but still, it gets pretty bad, to the point that in the final wave, the Torah is speaking, or the second to final wave, the Torah is speaking about how parents will eat their own children, the flesh of their own children, because they're so starving that they have no other food, and then ultimately ending in exile. So then
you see in Lamentations chapter 4, right? Lamentations chapter 4 is a fulfillment of this curse. I believe it's something like that.
Could be. I'd have to go look that up. But Leviticus chapter 26, verse 31 says, I will turn your cities into ruins and lay waste to your sanctuaries, and I will take no delight in the pleasing aroma of your offerings. I myself will lay waste the land so that your enemies who live there will be appalled. I will scatter you among the nations and will draw out my sword and pursue you. Your land will be laid waste and your cities will lie in ruins. Then the land will enjoy its Sabbath years, all the time that it lies desolate and you are in the country of your enemies. Then the land will rest and enjoy its Sabbaths. At the time that it lies desolate, the land will have the rest it did not have during the Sabbaths you lived in it. So in other words, that is the punishment ultimately for not keeping all of the commandments of the Torah, but specifically, I think the focus here is on the Sabbath year. If we don't allow the land to rest every 7th year, as we're asked to, as we're required to in Leviticus chapter 25, then if we continue to anger Yahweh, he will eventually throw us out of the land. And then, since there's no more Israelites, since there's no more Jews left in the land, then the land will finally get its Sabbath rests that you didn't think to give to it while you were living in the land. So,
in other words, there's no fooling him. That's what he's saying, right? Like, one way or another, the land's going to get its rest, whether you choose to abide in it, or if I have to cast you out and do it myself.
We could do this the easy way, or we could do this the hard way.
Exactly. Yeah.
We could do this with blessing, where you allow the land to rest on the 7th year, and I bring enough blessing on you so that the crops will be available until the 9th year. Or you can continue to enrage me, you can continue to infuriate me, and then my punishments will increase 7-fold, and then another 7-fold, and then another 7-fold, and then another 7-fold, which will result in your exile. You'll be thrown out of the land, and then finally the land will rest. I will allow the land is going to rest one way or another. It deserves its rest, just as every human being deserves their rest on the Sabbath day, and it's going to get that rest one way or another. So it's beautiful, it's very poetic, and yeah, absolutely. So right. So you're saying that overall, so you do not accept the the Pharisees, which later the the rabbis and the rabbinical movement met. So what does that look like to you on a day-to-day basis? Let's say, for instance, if we're talking already about the Sabbath, so not accepting. So we know the Pharisees, the rabbis laid down some very specific rules, right? The 39 melachot, they call it.
Yeah.
The 39 archetypes of work that Orthodox Jews, that rabbinical Jews are supposed to refrain from on the Sabbath.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you, and it gets to the point of almost being ridiculous. So carrying, I have a friend where I live here. I live in the Golan Heights in Israel, and I have a friend, very wonderful and special person, but very much, into Rabbinical Judaism. And I was speaking to him the other day, and he and his family, they're going on vacation, as many Israelis do when the summer comes, and they get out of Israel for a little while. And he said he and his family were going to go to a certain city, but they chose another city in the end because that first city did not have an eruv. Are you familiar with? Do you know what an eruv is?
It sounds. Explain it. I guess I don't want to.
Yeah, sure. It's a string around the city that basically turns that entire city into one dwelling. Mm-hmm. So therefore, when you carry outside of your house, it's as if you're not supposed to carry from a private residence to a public residence. So putting the string around the city essentially makes the entire city into one, if I remember the exact details correctly, into one large private residence. And now you can carry things like your keys, a handkerchief, whatever you want to carry in the streets of that city. But if the eruv wasn't there, if the string wasn't around the city, then you would not even be able to carry so much as your key outside of your house, because that would be considered a violation of these 39 melachot, these 39 forms of carrying. So, I mean, again, any thinking person, any normal person is going to see that this is it's insanity. How carrying a key outside of your house in your pocket in any way, shape, or form, for anyone who's thinking in a straightforward manner, how would that constitute a violation of the prohibition on Shabbat to avoid milacha, to avoid work? So that's the preface. So the question then is back to you. So if you're not a follower of the rabbis, if you've adopted a more scriptural or Karaite approach towards interpreting the Torah, then how does, let's say, something like Shabbat look for you? What do you generally do, and what do you generally not do on the Shabbat?
Sure. So for us, we have come to an understanding that the Shabbat begins in the evening, Friday evening to Saturday evening. That's how we operate in our family.
I agree. So, by the way,
I
agree with that, because I know there's a lot of controversy out there these days, especially that the idea is being popularized that the Shabbat doesn't begin until the morning, until Saturday morning. And I've gotten to a lot of discussion / arguments with people who hold that view, and I disagree with it very vehemently. So
sure.
I'm in agreement with you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and my understanding is that I believe that because I believe that that's how it was kept during Second Temple period. I believe that's probably how Yeshua kept it, and I don't see a contradiction, with the Torah. So, that's my understanding on it. But so we'll begin on Friday evening, right? I personally don't have any aversion to lighting a candle or lighting a match or starting a fire, because
I agree with you. Actually, I agree with you.
Yeah, I believe all of those 39 melachot that you're just detailing from like Mishnah, Tractate, Shabbat, right, are from the interpretation in Exodus chapter 35, where they're saying that this is in contrast to you're supposed to keep the Sabbath, and this is in contrast to all the things that define work, and everything that's defined as work is going to be based off of what it entails to create the tabernacle. And if anything entails creating the tabernacle, such as sewing or tearing or these kind of things, then therefore that is what's prohibited on the Sabbath. And so I don't think that that's what it's saying. I think it's a mountain out of a molehill to say that's where all the Sabbath laws derive from. It's not my that's not my understanding of it, right? So we would light a fire. We would.
So if I could just interrupt you for 1 second. So lighting fire is usually considered separate because it does say explicitly. I actually happen to agree with you, and I'm happy to give my reasoning why.
Sure.
But just to put things in perspective, if we go to Exodus 35:2, let me just bring it up here. So this is usually considered, if I remember the details of the rabbinical jurisprudence, I don't even know if this falls it probably falls as one of the 39 melachot, but even if so, there is ostensibly a direct textual basis for it in the Torah. So in 35:2.
Oh yes, correct.
I'm sorry, 35:3.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I'll just let me just post it actually, and then we can talk about it. So I'll just read it in the meantime. So for 6 days, this is Exodus chapter 35, verse 2. For 6 days, work is to be done, but the seventh day shall be your holy day, a day of Sabbath rest to Yahweh. Whoever does any work on it is to be put to death. And then Exodus 35:3 says, do not light a fire in any of your dwellings on the Sabbath day. So there, and curious how you understand that, and I'm happy also to give my view.
Sure. So the 35:3, I read it as part of the following portion, right? In verse 4 it says, Moses spake unto all the people of the congregation, the children of Israel, saying, this is the thing which Yah commanded, saying, take from among yourselves unto Yah whoever is willing, of a willing heart, let him bring an offering to Yah of gold, silver, and brass. So in my opinion, this has everything to do with metallurgy, forming metals and that kind of stuff for that. I also believe that's one interpretation. The other aspect I would say is also that it has something to do with work in general. I would say more along the lines of people would associate lighting a fire more with that type of work, not necessarily using a fire to keep yourself warm or to light a room. That's how I understand that. I'm curious to hear your interpretation, because that's where I get it from, and that's why I said that all these the 39 prohibitions are lumped into Exodus 35, because I remember reading in the Mishnah, Tractate Shabbat, where they talk about, okay, since you can't light a fire, you now need to have a candle. And now that you have to have a candle, you need to make sure that the wicks are kosher, right? And then there's certain kosher.
But they read every Shabbat in the rabbinical synagogues, B'ma Madlikim, one of the tractates in one of the a couple of the Mishnahs in Tractate Shabbat, about what kind of wicks and what kind of oil you're allowed to use, exactly as you're saying here.
So not only is it kind of, I believe, stretching what the intent of Exodus 35:3 is, as a result of that interpretation, they're already adding additional commandments or additional. They might not say that they are additional commandments, so I'll be generous, but I believe that they are definitely expectations of anyone within the religion, where they would say, well, if you're not abiding by this, you're going to either be frowned upon very harshly, or you might even be excommunicated.
Yep, I hear you. I'm trying to post this here. Let's see. Oh, finally, I don't know why it was being flagged as spam by YouTube. I was just quoting Exodus 35:3, but we finally got it. So it's Exodus 35 verse 3. Exodus chapter 35 verse 3. Do not light a fire in any of your dwellings on the Sabbath day. So I have a slightly different take on it.
Sure.
And I agree with you. I agree with your conclusion that we are allowed to light a fire on once Shabbat comes in. But so the way I see this verse is, so the context really, whenever we look at Shabbat, and Shabbat appears many times throughout not just the Torah, but throughout the Tanakh, we have many examples of violations of the Shabbat. So for instance, in the book of Nehemiah, it speaks about the surrounding nations bringing in merchandise to sell on Friday night,
Mhm.
or to bringing it into the gates of Jerusalem on Friday night to sell it on the Shabbat day, and eventually Nehemiah decides to lock the doors before sunset on a Friday night. By the way, another proof that Shabbat comes in Friday night. But so we have many mentions of the Shabbat throughout the Tanakh, but the only mention in the entire Tanakh of a prohibition against fire is right here in Exodus 35:3. Even in the Torah itself, the 5 books of Moses, Shabbat is mentioned. I don't have the count offhand, but I'm guessing at least 20 times, maybe even more. And never again is a prohibition, an explicit prohibition against fire mentioned. Not anywhere in the rest of the 5 books of Moses in the Torah, and not anywhere in the rest of the Tanakh. So this is the only place. This is kind of a it's not a hapax legomenon, but it's a verse.
Yeah.
The hapax concept, we'll call it.
Yeah.
So at any rate, so I think that's our first stance. And so whenever else Shabbat is referred to, whether it's in Jeremiah, whether it's in Nehemiah, whether it's in the many times in the rest of the 5 books of Moses, it always speaks about or implies milacha. It always implies that you should not be doing work, which Hebrew calls milacha, on the Shabbat day. And we even get reasoning. So in Exodus chapter 20, when the 10 Commandments are given, and I'll just turn to that for a second, we're getting explicit reasons in a number of places that we are to keep the Shabbat, right? So for instance, in Exodus chapter 20, verse 8, it says, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to Yahweh your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns, right? So the idea is that the reason that's given in many places is that we don't work in order that these the son, the daughter, the slaves, even the animals also get a day of rest, right?
Amen.
It's kind of a there's a social reason behind it, because these are entities that could easily be taken advantage of on the Shabbat, right? You can make your animals work, you can make your slaves work, and here we're told that you don't work in order that it doesn't say in order here, but there are other verses where it explicitly says in order that your son, your daughter, your male, female servant, etc., don't work, right? So we see again and again that the prohibition on Shabbat is not to do work. We rest. All of the members of the society rest. All the members of our household rest, and that makes a lot of sense, right? Yahweh rested on the 7th day, right? It even says in the following verse, for in 6 days Yahweh made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the 7th day. Therefore, Yahweh blessed the 7th day and made it holy, right? So we have reasoning as to why we're supposed to rest, not do work, okay? So I see the essence of the Shabbat as refraining from doing work, what the Torah calls, Torah calls milacha, okay? And so then how do we explain Exodus 35:3, the one verse where it does explicitly mention not to light, sometimes translated as kindle, not to light a fire on the Shabbat? I think that's the Torah is giving there the paradigm of the classic example of the type of work that in ancient times would have been done on Shabbat. And it's not speaking explicitly about just flipping a switch and lighting the fire. It's speaking about all of the work that was necessary in ancient times to get a fire to be lit, such as going out, gathering the wood. And we even have the story of the wood gatherer, right? We can get to that in a second. Bringing all the wood back home, chopping up the wood, preparing the wood, getting the fire going, constantly, starting the fire, kindling the fire, and so on, right? Anyone who's ever gone camping, I think we've all gone camping at least a couple times in our lives, know how difficult it is to get a fire going, right? If you're in the woods and you don't have any firewood there, right? You've got to do it all from scratch. And that's a lot of work. That's a lot of work. And we even have the example of the wood gatherer. And I'll just bring that up for a second. Well, I don't have to bring it up. There's the story of the person who was caught gathering wood on the Shabbat. And so that's actual work. He goes out on the Shabbat and he's gathering wood. And that's in Numbers chapter 15, verse 32. And they bring him back to Moses and they say, what should we do with this person? He was out gathering wood on the Shabbat. Moses puts him in jail, it says, and then asks Yahweh directly, and Yahweh says that this person needs to be put to death. He's violated Shabbat, right? And that's intuitive, because he actually went out and did actual work, hard work. He was out gathering wood on the Shabbat day. He wasn't resting, right?
Yeah.
So correct. I think that's the implication there, and it's not the fire per se. It's the work. It's the milacha that would be connected with making a fire in ancient times. Okay.
Yeah.
It's the essence is the milacha, not the fire. And in this day and age, where technology allows us to just flip a switch and a fire comes on, right? To just turn on a stove, or to flip a switch on a heater and the fire comes on. There's no milacha involved. There's no work involved. So it's my personal opinion, and it took me a long time to come to this opinion, because it does seem to say it explicitly in Exodus 35:3. But it's my personal opinion that therefore that's not what that verse means. It doesn't mean that fire per se is prohibited on the Shabbat, but it's bringing that verse is bringing the paradigm of the most common type of work that would have been done on the Shabbat in violation of the Shabbat, as we see in the case of the wood gather. So that's it in a nutshell. So I actually do light fire on the Shabbat, as long as it doesn't involve work. I would, and I have traveled in a car on the Shabbat, because there's no work involved in traveling in a car. In fact, I can make a strong case that it saves work. I remember when I used to live in Jerusalem, that I would see people on the hot summer days after going to the synagogue to pray. They would walk maybe sometimes an hour to get to their parents' house or to their rabbi's house in the hot, steaming August sun, where it's 95 degrees in the middle of the day, to get to Shabbat lunch at their rabbi's house, going up and down the hills, because Jerusalem is hilly, the hills of Jerusalem. Now that's work. Wouldn't it be much nicer to just hop in a car, flip a switch, turn on the air conditioner, and you're at your rabbi's house in 5 minutes, right? So we can make a case that keeping this commandment or keeping this verse literally, as it appears in Exodus 35:3, actually causes people to do more work and not less work. It takes away from the rest, doesn't add to the rest. So that's it in a nutshell.
I would also argue that you're not kindling a fire when you turn on an engine. That's, even if there were to be a spark, there's not actual like flame that's going to be kindled by wood, which is what I would think is the initial context. So if someone wanted to say, I don't want to, just to be on the safe side, I don't want to kindle a fire, fine. I would say, then don't set up a campfire, right? Don't, that's what it would be relevant to. It would be the parallel of that. Okay, don't set up a campfire. If you don't want to do that, that's the same thing. It's not flipping a switch, which there might be a spark, but if there was actual fire, we would have a lot less houses with electricity, right? Because everything would be on fire all the time. The other proof that I would use is Leviticus 6:12. Leviticus 6:12, it says, and this is with regards to the priests, right? It says, "And a fire upon the altar shall be burning in it; it shall not be put out, and the priest shall burn wood on it every morning."
Right.
And lay the burnt offering in order upon it, and shall burn there on the fat of the peace offerings. So that word, I believe, is barar as well, or ba'ar, excuse me, as well, which is the kindling, right? So the priests are supposed to be doing daily. And if kindling a fire is an affront to God, why is he having his priests do it daily without any, asterisk saying, but don't do it on the Sabbath? That's not there. So I don't think that's a problem for God. If anything, the kindling is, I agree with you, there's a lot of work involved if you don't have everything prepared, right? So what we do on during the cold winter Idaho months, we gather all the firewood, because we're wood stove, we're warmed up by wood stove, so we gather up all the firewood and have a big mountain 1.5 feet away from the wood stove, so we can just grab it and throw it in there, right? And just keep it going. And
I agree with you 100%. And I think that's completely permissible on the Shabbat, because you're not doing any work. You have everything ready. You've done all of the hard preparation that you need to before the Shabbat comes in. You've got your fire going. You have the wood nearby. You just toss another log on the fire. It takes all of 5 seconds, and there you go. Right.
Exactly.
And it would be, and that's another proof, by the way, that I have, that it's just not, it doesn't make logical sense to say that no in ancient times and in modern times, if you use wood to heat your home, it doesn't make any logical sense that you could enjoy the Shabbat or even survive in some cases without a fire going during the Shabbat. And it gets pretty cold in Israel. Everyone thinks Israel is just a hot desert, but that's not the truth. There are high elevations, and in the wintertime it can get, where I live, which is not even among the highest elevations. We're on kind of a plateau at I think at around 2,000, maybe 2,500 feet above sea level. It can easily get down into the mid 30s at night. And if you go further up into the northern Golan Heights, you're talking about it getting down into the 20s and to the teens. There are many high elevations that in the wintertime get freezing, and it's not practical to say that you can't heat your house on the Shabbat. And that in ancient times, when wood was essentially the only way that houses could be heated, that they weren't able to do it. So I agree with you 100% on that one.
Yeah. So, for Shabbat, we will kindle fires. I guess that'll be kind of going contrary to the consensus of like the rabbinical consensus. And we drive. We meet together for fellowship. I do believe that is a biblical requirement, right? That we are to gather, however that looks for people, whether it be online or I think it would be. There was no online, in Torah times. So it sounds to me like you would be communally gathering, have that holy convocation, the Mikra Kodesh. And so we gather, we bring food, we meat and cheese is completely permissible. I would, if anything, encourage it. But
as a vegetarian, I might
which is fine,
but that's okay.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I don't have a problem with people that that don't eat meat. That's not a problem. But I'm just saying, like, in terms of balking against the rabbinic norm, I'm very much so what's called approving of that. Just because it is such a turnoff to come into the Torah movement and then go, well, what do I need to do? And then the first thing you get is, well, the rabbis say this and the rabbis say that, and this is how you keep Shabbat. And it definitely helps turn people our way. I think.
I agree.
Back to
by the way, not just Gentiles or not just people outside of Israel, but it turns Jews away. I just gave when I do the Torah studies on Shabbat, I usually start with a monologue, and my monologue was really focusing on this yesterday, that Rabbinical Judaism is responsible, I would say, for most of the problems that we have in Israel right now and in the Jewish world, because most Jews want nothing to do with it. If they did a couple of 100 years ago want something to do with it, they want nothing to do with it anymore, and it's creating so many problems in this nation that I think it can indirectly, if not directly, be held responsible for things such as what happened on October 7th, the wars that we've gotten ourselves into, and the incredible social tensions that often arise in Israel between the religious and the so-called religious and the so-called non-religious. But anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, and that's my perspective as well, too, right? With regards to, how Jewish people see the Torah. And then it's the same thing for Christianity, right? Christianity sees the rabbinic interpretation as synonymous with the Torah. So that I remember coming into the Torah movement, and then the first synagogue that I went to was very, traditional. So you walk in and people wearing kippahs and talits and all that, and I wasn't turned away from it, but I was very cautious of it. I wasn't turned away from the Torah, but I was very cautious.
And you're saying this was a Christian Messianic? This was a Messianic synagogue, right?
Correct. Yeah, yeah. So, praise God that I was very much so seeking Him, and then using the Bible as my measuring rod for the truth, right? So I said, well, let me first find out if kippahs are a thing. If not, it's okay. Maybe that's just a preference or whatever, and all these things. So, like, I could see that the being historical or something like that, but it's just not a biblical commandment. So, I don't do that personally. So back to Shabbat, for our fellowship, I don't wear a kippah. I don't wear a talit. I do wear tassels.
Neither do I, as you can see.
Yeah. I wear tassels on a day-to-day basis.
Mhm.
And so those are like the differences, right? Where we've encountered up here, people from our fellowship have encountered like rabbis. And like, so for example, I have a specific example of one of the young ladies in our fellowship. She wears tassels. And because we believe that, men and women should wear tassels. There's no explicit prohibition one way or the other. And so she's wearing tassels, and she was encountered by a rabbinic rabbi. And the rabbinic rabbi very nicely spoke with her and pulled her aside. She said, just so you know, this is why, women don't wear these tassels, and kind of explained this to her. And as she just walked away perplexed, because she grew up in this kind of belief system, but she's like, I don't even understand how you would get there just from the plain text of the Torah. It doesn't make any sense. The Torah just says everyone do this, right? And I understand that there's different ways that people understand how to do that, which, that's okay. I'm not God. I'm not the one making the rules, but I read it as we should just wear them. So I wear them,
Yeah, I think the rabbi's opinion is that any commandment that is time limited, that is not a 24-hour day, 24-hour day, 7-day a week commandment, that women are exempt from it. If I remember their reasoning correctly, so they would say that because the tzitzit in the rabbinical view, even men don't really have to wear tzitzit at night. The tzitzit are the fringes at night because it says you should see them, and so they make an exegetical interpretation of that, and they say, well, you can't see them at night, so you don't have to wear them at night, and so therefore it's a time-bound mitzvah. It's a time-bound commandment, and all time-bound commandments, if I remember correctly, again I have to go look it up. I might be getting some of the details a bit wrong, but if I remember correctly, all time-bound commandments are women are exempt from all time-bound commandments. So that's their reasoning behind it, and of course it doesn't make any sense, right? You could perhaps make a case that one could potentially make a case that women don't need to wear tzitzit, but it would have to be based on the text, right?
Correct.
This is not in a logical way based on the text, right? This is making an almost ridiculous, exegesis on the idea that since you can't see the tzitzit at night, you don't have to wear it, and all women are therefore exempt from it because they're exempt from all mitzvot that are time bound, right? That's just not logical flow of thought. That's not a logical flow of thought, and that's what the rabbis specialize in. They specialize in flows of thought that are not logical. So again, I would say one could potentially make an argument, and I don't know. I'm still up in the air about whether about this particular topic, but one could say so. It does say on the corners of your garment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one could say that garment is really referring to the male garment, to the male robe that the males wore, and so therefore it's really referring to to males and not necessarily to females. But that would be that whether it's right or wrong, that would be at least a textually based or an historically based argument rather than an illogical argument, right?
Yeah.
So at any rate, okay. All right. So what else do you want to talk about here? I'll let you.
Yeah, no, I was just I was wondering with regards to Karaism, and how do you guys view like messianic figures, or like with regards to Yeshua? Is that something in Karaism? Is there where there's like a predominant view of Yeshua, or is there not? Do people just have different opinions, and it's not really like one thread of how people view him?
Right.
Well, the reason I ask this is because obviously in Rabbinic Judaism, there's like it seems like hatred, right? Like in terms of the documents in the Talmud, right? And if anything, a lot of the doctrines that have evolved ever since the Mishnah was compiled have seemed to evolved as a polemic against Christianity, right? So the way that the Pharisees or the rabbis might have viewed something before Yeshua where it was viewed as a messianic prophecy, later on gets flipped and says, actually, that wasn't a messianic prophecy. Let's just rewrite how we interpret that. And then it's actually not messianic at all now. Isaiah 53 is about Israel and that kind of thing, right? Which I believe that it is about Israel too. But that's like, I don't want to throw the topic of discussion off, right? So what I'm saying is there something similar in Karaism where you guys have like an understanding of Jesus?
Right. Well, so we have to understand that Karaism. Let me speak first about myself and my
Sure.
opinion regarding this. Okay.
Sure.
So I'm not a follower of Jesus. I'm not a Messianic. I personally just see him as an historical figure.
Okay.
I don't see him as former Messiah or future Messiah over Israel, and I certainly don't see him as Son of God or having any kind of special divinity more than any other human being would have had. And if we know that Moses himself was just a human being, he lived and he died, and he's not. Maybe he'll come back during the resurrection that's spoken about, for instance, in Daniel chapter 12, verse 2. But there's no implication that we're waiting for Moses to come back to rule over Israel.
Sure.
So I would say the same applies to Jesus / Yeshua. I see him as an historical figure. Okay.
Okay.
That being said, I do not have a hatred towards him as an historical figure. I don't have a hatred towards him at all. I think what he was trying to do was fight against essentially the corruption in the Jewish world at that time, which included both the Sadducees, but especially the Pharisees, as we mentioned his tirade in Matthew 23 against the Pharisees, and to return to a more normal and natural understanding of the Torah. A former teacher, a Karaite teacher of mine from many years ago, used to say that he'd say Jesus is essentially a Karaite.
Yeah,
I think that's correct. I think that's right.
I agree.
I think that's exactly where we're standing with him. So I do find the New Testament and some of his teachings, not all, but many of his teachings, very interesting. And I agree with many of his teachings. Again, where I depart is, again, this is me personally, and I would say I speak for most Karaites, if not all Karaites. Well, most, there's always a couple that you can't speak for, but I would say that I don't accept any of the statements in the New Testament where he carried out any of the various miracles. I was reading actually earlier today in John chapter 6, I believe it is, where it speaks about him multiplying the loaves of bread and the fish, and then walking on water out to the boat. So I personally do not believe that at all. I think this is what I would consider Rebbe stories. They would make up very similar stories about the Chabadniks, if you're familiar with Chabad or Lubavitch movement.
A little bit,
yeah. They will make up, maybe not to this degree, but they'll make up all kinds of stories to aggrandize or to make their former Rebbe larger than life. And then these stories might grow and become even, be added onto over time. The legends will become taller and taller. And that's really where I see it. I see it as, I see the New Testament, and especially we talk about the Synoptic Gospels, which most scholars say were written within 50 years after Jesus' death. So we're talking about, by the end of the 1st century CE. So I see this as followers of Jesus, Yeshua. I have no problem calling him Yeshua, by the way. I see this as Rebbe stories or tributes to this historical figure Yeshua, that they had taken on, many of them posthumously, after Yeshua had already died, that they had taken on as their Rebbe, and so they made this book which encompassed some of his true teachings, and then added onto it were a whole bunch of legends. So that's where I personally stand.
Sure.
And I would say that I speak for most Karaites when I would say they probably are either in that camp. So we have to understand that in the Karaite world can be broken up to what we call them the Egyptian Karaites and the Neo-Karaites. So okay. The Egyptian Karaites are the just very briefly, the Egyptian Karaites are the Karaites that were born into the Karaite world. The center of Karaism before it moved to Israel in the early 1950s was in Egypt, and after the War of Independence that the state of Israel fought in 1948, all of the Jews were thrown out of Egypt in the ensuing years, and that included the Karaites. So the center of Karaism at that point moved from Cairo, Egypt, to Israel. Its center today is in Ramla for what we call the Egyptian Karaites, and they are much more traditional. Their traditions stretch back into the Middle Ages. They have something that they call Sevela Yerusha, which means really the burden of transmission. But I hesitate to call it an oral law because it's not an oral law, but it's basically traditions that have grown over the generations that they adhere to, and they believe that as long as these traditions don't contradict the written Torah, then there's no problem keeping them. And I have no problem with that in theory. The problem is that over the centuries, they have absorbed a lot of rabbinical traditions, a lot of rabbinical ways of thinking. So, for instance, the religious Egyptian Karaites will wear a kippah on their head. They will wear a yarmulke on their head. They will say prayers. They'll say fixed prayers before they eat a fruit, which are very similar to the rabbinical prayers. So, for instance, if they're going to eat an orange, they'll say Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri ha'etz, which means thanking God for the fruit of the tree. They'll do ceremonies such as Havdalah, so a traditional ceremony that the rabbinical Jews do when Shabbat goes out, and so on and so forth. And it's more than that. They've really adopted a certain rabbinical mentality over the years. And so those are the Egyptian Karaites. And then the other subgroup is what is generally referred to as the Neo-Karaites. The Neo-Karaites are people like myself that found their way into Karaism. So I was not born a Karaite. I did not grow up as a Karaite. I grew up in a conservative Jewish family in the suburbs of New York. And I left Judaism basically completely after my bar mitzvah when I was 13 years old. I wanted nothing more to do with it. And then in my 20s, I started slowly but surely finding my way back to Judaism, moved to Israel, and became an Orthodox Jew for about close to 10 years. I never really bought into the whole thing, but I became an Orthodox Jew. I lived as an Orthodox Jew at varying levels of observance for close to 10 years. And then in the mid 1990s, I started getting very into reading Tanakh. A good friend of mine said, you should just read the Tanakh straight. And I started doing it. And I said, this is what I've been looking for all along. And then eventually I was put in contact with the Karaite community in Jerusalem. And as soon as I met them, I said, this is exactly what I've always been looking for. I knew at that moment that I was going to be a Karaite. But it took a while for me to officially declare because there is a stigma against being a Karaite. So I think it was in the year 2001. I don't remember the exact date, but right around 9/11, I remember it was more or less around that time that I officially declared myself as a Karaite and let everyone know about it. And I mean everyone. I was very gung-ho about it. So I still am. Although I've mellowed out a little bit. I tried to not to force it down people's throats, although I have been accused of still trying to do that from time to time. At any rate, so to make a long story short, so I would fall into the category of the Neo-Karaites, people who found our way to Karaism on our own. And we have significantly different views from the Egyptian Karaites. We tend not to be at all caught up in this medieval Karaite transmission of traditions, the Sevela Yerusha. And I would say that we're much less influenced by rabbinical thought, rabbinical ideas, rabbinical concepts. So that being said, the question was regarding Jesus / Yeshua. So there might be a difference. So that we could expect that the Egyptian Karaites would have a much more rabbinical, traditional view of Jesus / Yeshua than us Neo-Karaites, and it would be a much more negative view. It would be the more traditional rabbinical view. They would see Jesus as a very negative figure, as a heretic essentially.
Yeah.
So that's but I, as a Neo-Karaite, as I mentioned, and I would say many other Neo-Karaites, we certainly would not accept him as God, Son of God, past or future Messiah over Israel, and we certainly would not accept things such as the virgin birth, the resurrection after 3 days, and so on and so forth. But again, as an historical figure, as just an historical figure who, after the fact, became very important for various reasons, then I have no specifically negative feelings towards him, and I agree with many of his teachings, not all, because again, I was reading earlier in John 6, so let's see if I could bring it up for a second. So I think in John 6 he speaks about how he tells his followers that they don't need to eat food and drink wine, that his flesh is the food, and that his blood is the wine. And it says afterwards that many of his followers abandoned him with this after this teaching. So things like that, where he seems to be saying that he's presenting himself as a kind of a special messianic figure, that's where I would depart ways with it. I think that this is, and I don't want to cast aspersions, but I've met in my own life people in Israel who kind of had a messianic complex, and when I read things like that from Jesus, then from Yeshua, then I feel like he kind of had a somewhat of a messianic complex. So that's where I stand, straight out,
Sure.
But I don't have any negative feelings towards him as an historical figure.
So it's funny that you said about the Egyptian Karaites, because there's a couple of times in the New Testament where it talks about the beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the thing is, the description is for their leaven is doctrine, and a little leaven leavens a lump. And it's just interesting because that seems to be what happened in the Egyptian Karaite movement, right? You have the leaven of the Pharisees, and that's exactly what I see in Messianic Judaism on my end, right? Like the people, followers of Yeshua, start, the one thing that I find completely difficult to swallow is when people do netilat yadayim, the washing of the hands,
right? In
my movement, right? When Yeshua explicitly condemns that very practice in Mark chapter 7. So I find that offensive to some degree, right? The other point I wanted to make, so I understand where you come from in terms of like the claims that of Yeshua based off the Gospels, where some of them seem like very over the top. The one thing that I got to say is that when I came to Torah, I was questioning all things, including Yeshua, to be quite honest, because I'm like, I want to make sure that I'm right, and these things are not incompatible, and all that. So the one thing that I find that is, I would say, objectively a fulfillment of prophecy. Now, some might say that it's not, it's fine. But, in Genesis 22, you have Abraham who's offering Isaac, his firstborn son, the son of the promise, right? And he gets to the point where he's about to slaughter Isaac, and the angel comes and tells him, no, don't do that. And then in I think it's verse 18 where he says something along the lines of, in you all the nations, and in your seed, and in your seed all the nations of the earth will be blessed because you obeyed my voice, right? And so the parallel to that is the actual crucifixion of Yeshua, who was the firstborn, right? The firstborn of God, right? I believe that. Obviously, you just said you don't. But now we actually have that the death of the firstborn, and through him, through his movement, through Christianity, I would argue that all of the world has been blessed by the Bible, right?
Mhm.
Because his followers essentially took that book and made it more prominent than, I would say, the insular sect of Pharisees, right? Or insular sect of Judaism, where they are putting it out there. I know there's shortcomings. I'm not arguing all that, right? And there's obviously antinomianism and all that. But as an overall movement, I would say they got this book into people's hands, and the result is that people are at least keeping 9 out of the 10 commandments, right? Which in and of itself is already a great accomplishment. And we see that in the Western world, where people don't even believe it's wrong to lie. You know, people just lie like crazy. People murder like crazy. I mean, I was just listening to that story of Carmelo Anthony. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but there was this young man that murdered a white man.
Yes. Right. Yeah. I've heard a lot about it. I haven't been following it so much, but I know it's a big story in the U.S. right now.
Yeah. So he murdered a white man, and then the result is that you have all these people on the murderer side saying, you know, that we're bad for putting him in jail for 35 years,
right?
And it's like, how does that even? How do you even process that, right? And I found it particularly interesting because it happened around the time that we're reading to the book of Numbers, and it says in the Korah rebellion, right? Korah challenges Moses, and Moses tells him, "Come back tomorrow with your censers, and we'll see essentially who God calls them his people." Right. And God makes a choice, and the earth swallows up Korah and his followers. And the very next day, the next thing that Israel says is, "You killed the people of God." It's like Moses didn't do anything. God did this. Right. And I found that to be like a parallel to this modern day thing, where it's like we put a murderer in jail and people are saying, "Why are you punishing the people of God?" That's the parallel, in my opinion. It's like it's backwards. It's inverted. So what I would say, like, that I find very compelling is, you know, the followers of Yeshua didn't have a printing press. They are in extreme opposition, at least from the beginning, with the being oppressed. You know, you got Nero executing Christians, and you have a lot of in a pagan world. They were able to get God's word out to the four corners of the world, so to speak. And so to me, that is a very compelling argument for Yeshua, right? Now, the other claims, you know, that I understand I would say that they come with faith, right? But I would say that they're not contrary to any of the things within the Tanakh, right? There are instances where Elijah feeds, 100 men. There are instances where I would say that John 6 is where he talks about, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood. To me, it sounds like the Balaam prophecy, where he says that Israel is like a lion and will eat the flesh and drink the blood of the slain. To me, it sounds like it's connecting a prophetic, kind of a weird statement, right? Because Balaam makes this statement in the book of Numbers, and we know by the book of Numbers that drinking blood is prohibited. But he makes a statement about that, and it's like, well, what does that mean, Balaam? That's kind of weird, right? And then,
but that's meant to be poetic. That's meant to be
correct.
poetic.
And I would argue that's exactly what Yeshua is saying, right? He didn't actually command his followers to drink his blood, and I would say if he did that, that would be a problem, right? Like, because we already know from Leviticus 17 that that's a problem. So it's also poetic. So, in my opinion, these are two poetic statements that he's trying to connect. And so,
I didn't think he meant it literally. I wasn't making the point that he meant it literally.
Sure.
I guess he's making the point that it shows. I could just even read it. It's in John 6, chapter 35. Jesus declared, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry. Whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. But as I told you, you have seen me and still you do not believe. All those the Father gives me will come to me." And so on. For my Father's will, this is John 6, chapter 6, verse 40. For my Father's will is that everyone who looks to the Son and believes in him shall have eternal life, and I will raise them up at that last day. So my contention is not that he literally meant that people should chop him up and start eating his flesh and drinking his blood, but that he seems to how can I put this delicately? He seems to have a messianic complex. He seems to think that this analogy that he uses, that by coming close to him, then people will achieve salvation, right? And my disagreement there is that I don't see this as a fact. I see this as his opinion, at least as expressed in these texts, of what he thought he was. And to make a long story short, I don't agree with his belief that he seems to clearly have in this and many other verses, that he is some kind of special messianic figure.
Sure. So the one thing that I would just offer as a possible reconciliation with that, and like something that would be separate than the text, right? So in the Torah, we read about keeping the commandments, and that gives you eternal life, or not necessarily eternal life. I would say that's more of a spiritual extrapolation. Let me take that back. In the Torah, we read about keeping the commandments gives you life, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And later on in that same book, in John chapter 14, he says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." Right. So I would argue that statement is not saying I'm like I alone am like this separate thing from what was previously established. I would argue that he's saying, I am the Torah. I am synonymous with God's word. I am the word made flesh. And that's how we should see it, because those are his words, right? So essentially, I believe he's saying, I am the Torah. Whoever comes to me will have eternal life. And I believe that we can apply it that way retroactively. So in those other statements where he seems to be saying, you come to me, whoever comes to me, who the Father gives me, to me, that sounds like, with these Torah eyes that I have, right? It sounds like he's saying, believe the Torah and keep the Torah. And that's how you get to the Father, right? Mm-hmm. No man comes to the Father but by me. And so I just offer that as a possible reconciliation. And it sounds extremely poetic. I get it. Like I get that, but I'd like to present that as a more possible, as a way of easily reconciling it with what the Torah has already established, that through his Torah, we're to get blessings. And if we deny them, we're going to get cursings.
Mm-hmm. But then again, I would respond by saying, why through him? It could be any teacher of the Torah. In other words, he certainly was teaching a more pure version of the Torah. But there are, over the centuries, over the millennia, there have been many teachers who have taught a more pure version of the Torah, including many Karaite sages. So again, that's fine what you're saying. I mean, that's fine and dandy what you're saying, but you're saying something more than that. You're saying essentially that that Yeshua was the ultimate teacher for all times of the Torah, right? If I'm reading into what you're saying.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say history bears that out. But the thing is, what I'd like to separate and just at least clarify, right? Mm-hmm. I don't have a hard stance on you must accept him, and therefore all you got to do is accept him, and you'll be saved, right? So that's not what I'm trying to convey to you in any way, right? That's just I want to make sure I make that clear.
Or else your doctrine would be more standard Christianity, that all you need to do is accept Jesus into your life and you're automatically saved. But that's correct, right? Clearly not your doctrine, because you believe that Christians must be Torah observant. So so pretty obvious, but
and in my understanding of it, right, there's a problem with everyone has to believe in Jesus. And if they don't believe in Jesus, then they're going to hell, right? And then you have various interpretations of how that works retroactively, right? Because people will say naturally, because it's logical, what about the people that were here before Jesus, right? Did they go to hell because they didn't believe in Jesus? And then the natural response is, well, if they believed in some kind of messianic figure, then it retroactively applies and all that. And I just find that strained. That's kind of a strained explanation. To me, it sounds like, well, if God reveals himself to you, he's going to judge you up to that point, what he's revealed to you, right? So based off of the information of his word that he's given to you, he will use that and judge you as a good judge would. That's my understanding. And so with that said, I understand that maybe some people are not going to be have Yeshua revealed to them, right? And that's fine. And it's not my job to like force it down anybody's throat. Sure. All I'm saying, I think that there's a way to reconcile this text here and have it not be contrary to the Torah. And I believe that if people were not revealed directly from God, even let's say, I'm going to give you a completely different example. We'll just talk about, back to Genesis, to Abraham, right? It is not a standard thing for us to offer up our firstborns, right? He was testing Abraham specifically. So I would say that if Abraham disobeyed that, he would have been disobeying God, right? If he didn't take Abraham and put the wood on him and then go up in the mountain to go worship, he would have been disobeying God. And that is not like a universal Torah commandment. It's just something God told him, right? So in my opinion, it seems to be that Yeshua, Jesus, reveals himself to some people and some he doesn't, right? So, but I'm just more than anything concerned with the text. And I'm saying, I think that the way that there's ways to read it, and it is not contradictory to the Torah. There's very easy ways to find a Torah-based explanation of what he says.
Okay. I mean, again, what he's saying or what he's preaching, I don't think is necessarily, much of what he's preaching, I don't think is necessarily contradictory to the Torah. Where I have disagreement is these some of the doctrine, again, regarding his supposed miracles.
Yeah.
The belief that he rose from the grave on the third day. The belief that he is, and I'm not even sure where you stand in terms of, so do you believe that he's just a human being who's a Messiah who will come back in the end of days to be king over Israel, or do you attribute to him some kind of special divine nature? So in other words, the analogy I've often heard is so we're all the physical world is like a giant video game, and we're all avatars in this giant video game.
Yeah.
Behind my avatar, this body is my soul somewhere in the spiritual world, and behind your body, which is your avatar, is your soul somewhere in the spiritual world. But behind Yeshua's avatar is God himself. That's the analogy that I've often heard. So do you believe something like that, or do you believe that he was a purely 100% human figure, like Moses, like David, like Solomon, who just happens to be who will be resurrected at the end of days, and just as everyone will, it says in Daniel chapter 12 verse 2, and then at that point he will assume kingship over Israel? Because if so, then that's kind of not that different from what I mentioned Lubavitch and I mentioned Chabad. It's not that different from what Lubavitch / Chabad believe about their Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson, which I vehemently disagree with them. But I'm curious where you stand theologically on that particular issue.
Sure. So I kind of have like a view of Yeshua as like from the perspective of the Targums. So the Targums, they kind of they get this vision of the word of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, the word of Yah. And I would say it's very prevalent in the book of Ezekiel, right? Ezekiel says, the word of the Lord came to me and he said, right? It's almost a personified, a personification of God's word came and spoke to Ezekiel. And what I think the Targumists do is they grab that concept and then they reinterpret and add it back in anytime there's like an extreme anthropomorphism that happens in the beginning, right? So when you have Adam and Eve walking and after they ate the fruit, it says that the memra of God, or the word of God, was walking in the cool of the garden, right? And
it's correct. It's kol. I can't remember the exact words offhand, but it says the voice of God was walking in the heat of the day, or something like that, through the garden.
Exactly. And so it becomes like in Rabbinic Judaism. I don't know how they would interpret that. Perhaps they kind of go to like it's a vision, or maybe I'm not sure how they would do that, but it sounds, that's what they say. They'll say for like Genesis 18. But I have a view more of like Yeshua's, the God's word, and the way that he chooses to communicate to humanity. So in other words, he exists, or pre-existed before, and maybe he manifested in the burning bush, or he later on manifests in the cloud, or that. So it seems like a spiritual.
I think I know where you're coming from. Sorry to interrupt, but just very briefly, because I also have a very close friend who also promotes this. I think this particular same view that you're saying is that where angels appear. So, for instance, the burning bush, right? It says that Yahweh spoke to Moses, or in the case of Jacob wrestling with the angel before he enters back into Israel and Peniel, that angel also is represented by Yeshua, and in many different places where angels appear, where it seems to be where it seems to be an angel, but the name Yahweh is used interchangeably with that angel. Then if I understand what you're saying correctly, then you believe that that's an indication that angel is actually Yeshua. I mean,
I get that from Exodus, where it says, "I will put my name on him, and he will not pardon your transgressions." Right. So to me, it's like a key to try to figure all this stuff out. Again, I'm not saying that this was him every time. It's a good way, in my opinion, how to connect the dots, right? And so I thought about this analogy, and it's a silly analogy, but my arms are not me necessarily, but they are part of me, right? And if I were to, I use them to communicate, I work on the computer all day. If I were to go to war and have both of my arms blown off, well, that doesn't mean that I'm any less me, and that doesn't mean that my arms are not of the same essence that they were before they got blown off, right? So that's kind of how I understand Yeshua. I'm not a Trinitarian, and quite honest, I don't even, if like people don't even really believe that he's divine, I don't see a requirement, right? I just see that it's a very good explanation for the things that are quite mysterious in the Tanakh, where you have this angel of Yehovah, right, that appears before people and seems to take the name of the Father on. And so that to me is very it's very helpful in explaining that. And so that's my view.
I understand. Again, I don't know how much you want to go down this road. I guess I'll just respond with my belief on that.
Sure.
So it is true that there are many places in the Torah and the Tanakh where we see that it's talking about an angel, a physical manifestation in the physical world, and then the word Yahweh is used regarding interaction with that angel, right? But I don't see that as, I see that as, so an angel, the Hebrew word for angel is malach. Malach is a messenger. In fact, the Greek word angelos also means angel, comes from the Greek word angelos, which means messenger, right? And so that is, in my opinion, the textual explanation for why we can have the name Yahweh used with interaction with a physical angel, because this is a messenger of Yahweh, and he's doing the bidding of Yahweh. So it would be, I guess the analogy would be, I don't know, if I were sent on as a messenger to I don't know, Donald Trump or something like that, from Bibi Netanyahu. Not that this would ever happen, but and I would go there and I would say, Bibi Netanyahu says, I'm really sorry, I was acting like a jerk or something like that, and then Donald Trump would say back to me, well, Bibi, you need to get your act together or something like that, right? So he's speaking to me, right? But he might say things like, "Bibi, you need to get your act together," right?
Sure.
That's kind of the analogy. It's my name, or I hate this analogy because I'm not a very big fan of Bibi. I'm a much bigger fan of Trump than I am of Bibi. But it would be completely natural to give a message or to understand that I'm a representative in this hypothetical scenario of Bibi, and to refer to me as Bibi, or to call me Bibi as a way of saying that this message needs to be transmitted back to the one who sent me. So I think that's all that's going on there. When angels are referred to as Yahweh, or to say Yahweh spoke to, it's clear, an angel, and Yahweh spoke to such and such, or Yahweh did such and such. I think that's all that's going on there. These are messengers of Yahweh, but it's not. I don't think there's any indication that it's one particular messenger. Meaning, in your conception of it, that it's Jesus / Yeshua. These are just different messengers that are taking on physical manifestations throughout the various stories in the Tanakh. That's the way I see it, and I think it's backed up textually as well, in my strong opinion.
Yeah,
so,
no, I understand that, and I'm totally aware that it might not be him all the time. In my perspective, I might be falsely attributing an encounter that to Yeshua that wasn't actually Yeshua. I believe there's plenty of angels and all that, right now, and so I'm glad to hear that we're at least on the same page with regards to messengers. That they could be heavenly bodies and this and that. It wasn't like a literal, just messenger, human flesh and blood messenger, right? Because I do. I do understand that some people might say that, right? And at least from what I understand from the Sadducees, from the very little that we know, is that they didn't believe in angels, and it was just flesh and blood messengers and that kind of thing, right? So I think that God does have supernatural beings that he sends to communicate to people and all that, and then not every one of them is Yeshua. But the one thing that I do see is that if in Psalm 110, it says, and the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies a footstool. And so it does seem to me like there's an exalted Yeshua, right? Now does that mean that he's in the heavens sitting there? I'm not saying that, right? I'm not exactly saying that. to me, it sounds like that there is a person that is going to have some kind of authority given by God. And so these are the things that that I put together, and I'm like, well, they seem to fit with the narrative that is within the New Testament documents. So I don't find them contradictory to the Tanakh. It seems very a continuation of it. But the New Testament itself, I would say, also makes it a point to say that not all of this is revealed to everybody, right? So I think we need to have grace with each other if someone doesn't see it, and not try to jam our perspective down someone's throat.
Sure. And I feel the same way. And again, that's why I'm kind of letting you lead this part of the discussion here, because I don't know how much you want to get into this and focus on this, or if you want to focus on other things. My belief system has developed to the point of, if I encounter someone who does believe these things about Jesus, Yeshua, I do not, even though I disagree with it, I actually don't want to convince them otherwise, because where does that leave them? It's such a basic part of their faith, and it's an important part of their day-to-day life, their morality, their entire worldview. If I were to go ahead and convince people to drop that belief system, then it might leave some people, I'm not saying you, but it might leave some people just out in the middle of nowhere without a raft in the middle of a very stormy sea. So
Sure.
Again, although again, as you know, I don't agree with this, but
Sure.
I don't feel the burning desire to necessarily go in polemics against Christians, because I don't see what the ultimate outcome at this point in time would be. But I'll let you take the conversation where you want to take it. If you want to focus on that, we can. Or if you want to talk to something else, we can.
I find it refreshing, to be quite honest, because that we can even just have the conversation, right, and just talk about different ideas and not agree, right? Because
Sure.
it's okay, but I one thing I did want to ask is with regards to, because it's day to day life, and when it comes to kashrut or kosher eating, I like to call it biblically clean eating, because
Yep.
there's so many different layers added to kosher eating. Like, I was just listening to this thing the other day. We're talking about having a kosher tefillin box, and I'm like, I don't know, you can eat a box, so and so and I got my, like I said, my Targum on Kelos, and it's got a stamp of kosher on it, and I'm like, so I call it biblically clean. But so my question to you is, what does that look like to you, right? Because obviously, when you look up kosher eating, you're going to get all kinds of things. Probably the first thing is going to be meat, no meat and cheese, and all these other things. So how does
Right.
that look like to someone that essentially believes Karaism?
Right. So first and foremost, well, even before I say that, there's no prohibition against mixing meat and milk, in my opinion. It's pretty clear, right? So the prohibition is lo tevashel gedi b'chelev imo. Don't cook a baby goat, in its own mother's milk, in b'chelev imo, right? So I think that is the clear implication there, that you don't take a baby and cook it in its own mother's milk. The mother's milk is meant to nourish it and to make it grow, and there's just something disgusting about committing such an act. It's just it's a complete disrespect to life that Yahweh has placed on this earth. Another explanation that I've heard over the years is that it was an ancient pagan ritual to take a baby animal and cook it in its own mother's milk, and this is the Torah's polemic against that ritual. But either way, it means the same thing, which is not to cook a baby mammal in its own mother's milk. And so therefore there's no blanket prohibition against mixing milk and meat. If you live on a farm and you farm your own animals, then you're going to know exactly who the kid is and who the mother is. So if you do end up killing the kid, you're going to know where who the mother is. If you don't live on a farm and you're buying your milk and meat at the grocery store, the chances of you buying a carton of milk and a package of meat and it being the child and the mother are so rare that they're, of course, negligible, right? So no matter how you slice it, there's no prohibition against combining milk and meat in any way, shape, and form.
I have one thought on that, just as because I agree with both of those interpretations. There's a third option that I've heard and I read through, and I found it very interesting. So that the word boil, I don't remember off the top of my head, but it could be interpreted. It could be interpreted as seethe or allowed to age in its mother's milk. So based off of the fact that it's always paralleled between, or it's always right next to the verses before and the verses after are about tithing. One of the thoughts is that it might be about, you shall not delay to offer your kid as an offering while it's in his mother's milk, right? Don't take your time. In other words, bring the kid quickly to the temple as you're supposed to do. I think in Deuteronomy, it starts with that you shall not you shall not boil a kid in his mother's milk, and then the very next verse is a bunch of offering passages. So I just like to offer that as a possible interpretation, and it's interesting because I got that from a rabbinic, like a rabbinic source, and they said that that's probably what it means. But we still keep the separation of meat and milk, just because that is custom and it was ordained by the rabbis.
Right. I'm gonna have to disagree with that interpretation. I understand what they're getting at. So the underlying root there, so the Hebrew, which is lo tivashel, so the underlying root, which is bashal, bet shin lamed, could be understood as to allow something to sit, to ripen. Even in modern Hebrew, is based on that root. Okay, mashu mafshil. It becomes ripe. So I get the approach, but I don't it that doesn't make sense to me there, because really livashel, that particular form, really does mean to seethe, to stew in its mother's milk. The milk is a liquid, and the thing that is often stewed, the thing that is often cooked in the liquid, is meat, right? That's mentioned many times, that particular verb with cooking meat. And so I think it is specifically speaking about cooking meat in its own mother's milk. In this liquid is mother's milk. But it's an interesting interpretation. It sounds like a very rabbinical interpretation. Actually, you mentioned you heard it from a rabbi. And that actually sounds like a rabbinical interpretation, because it doesn't seem like what we call a pshat, or a straightforward simplistic interpretation. It seems like there's a bit of exegetical gymnastics going on there. But I'll keep my mind open about that one, and who knows if I come across it.
The reason I found it interesting is because contextually it doesn't make sense, right? Is if you're looking at the passage before and after, they're about offerings, and then the one smack in the middle is about eating prohibitions. It seems a little bit odd, right? So that's why I find that one interesting. Either way, I'm not trying to boil a kid in its own mother's milk. Sure. Like that's not what I would condone for anyone to do. I find it as an interesting possibility.
All right, I'll definitely keep that in mind when I come across those verses next time. In terms of other elements of kashrut, so first and foremost, what biblical kashrut has laid out in Leviticus 11 are certain animals that are permitted to eat, and certain animals that are not permitted to eat. That's really the essence of what it is, right? So again, in terms of the mammals, right? It's mammals that chew their cud and have completely split hooves. So those are basically the ruminants are permitted to eat, and anything that's not a ruminant is not permitted to eat. And I shouldn't say that's not correct, because they're ruminants. I shouldn't say any animal that's not a ruminant and or does not have split hooves is not permitted to eat. In the case of the birds, we have specific species which are mentioned as being forbidden from eating, and all the rest ostensibly are permitted to eat. And then in the case of the fish, they have to have the fins and the scales, and so on and so forth, right? So so that's really the essence. The essence of biblical kosher is what animals are you permitted to eat, and what animals are you not permitted to eat. And that's it in a nutshell. That's the core of it. I mean, there are other, if you want to talk about in general, laws related to eating. So there are other laws, right, which could fit into the general rubric of kosher or not kosher. So we're not supposed to eat the blood of the animals, right? We're supposed to drain the blood out. The rabbis take this again, as usual, to an extreme, and they'll take the flesh and then they'll salt it afterwards to draw out even more of the blood. I don't think that's necessary. It just means let the blood drain out.
Sure.
Don't eat the blood. We're not supposed to, as Israel, we're not supposed to eat nivela and trefa. So nivela is an animal that dies on its own.
Yeah.
Trefa is an animal that's been hunted as prey, roadkill essentially, and so we're not supposed to eat that. We're not supposed to eat it says that we're not supposed to eat the gid and nasheh, usually understood as the sciatic nerve, but not necessarily. There are other interpretations of what that means, based on the fact that the angel touched Jacob on the angel we were talking about before touched Jacob on the sciatic nerve, and so on and so forth. Regarding kosher slaughter, there's no specific rules in the Tanakh. So this is a big one. There's a big disagreement between Karaites and Rabbinical Jews. There's no specific set of laws in the Torah regarding how you need to slaughter an animal. The only requirement is that once the animal is slaughtered, then its blood has to be drained.
Sure.
And that's it. I mean, there are some other elements as well, such as such as, again, it speaks about in Leviticus 11 about the transfer of ritual impurity onto certain vessels, and the parameters for transfer of ritual impurity onto certain vessels. That doesn't, I guess it would apply in this in this day and age, but since most well, I shouldn't say that, some vessels it might still apply to, but yeah, the things that I mentioned are basically the core elements of biblical kosher. I might have.
So in other words, it sounds like you just do what the Bible says, right? And it's
Pretty
not
much,
yeah. So you wouldn't. Let me ask this question: would you be opposed to going to a normal restaurant? I guess is
absolutely not. And when I was back in New York this past year, I did it all the time. I am careful what I order. What I order at these restaurants, because I don't know what's going on in the kitchen. Sure. And a lot of these restaurants, they're cooking unkosher animals there. There's a lot of pig, a lot of pork, a lot of all this kind of stuff. But let's put it this way: if I knew that the only animals that were being cooked there were kosher animals, then I would have no problem whatsoever. And as I mentioned, I'm a vegetarian anyway, so it really doesn't affect me. So I have no problem going to a non-kosher restaurant as long as I'm more than reasonably pretty assured that the food that's going to be put on my plate has not in some way been contaminated with unkosher animals or unkosher parts of animals. Because as well, on top of it, another element of kashrut that's really spoken a lot more about in the book of Leviticus is the forbidden fats, the chelev, right? So there are certain fats of the animal, right? The fat around the kidney, the tail fat of the lamb, etc., is God's food. Right, I always like to call it the ambrosia of the Torah. Right, it's the food for not the gods, but the food for Yahweh, and we're not supposed to partake of it at all. Human beings are not supposed to partake of it at all. That's either supposed to be thrown on the altar as food for Yahweh, or it's supposed to be discarded. We're not allowed to eat it. That's his special food. So again, if you have chopped meat, then you don't know if it's in a non-kosher. Actually, even if it's in a kosher, because the rabbis say that you can eat these forbidden foods, fats, as long as they're not offered as sacrifices. So you even have to be careful in a kosher restaurant, as a matter of fact, which is a whole other story in and of itself. But if I were in a non-kosher restaurant and I'm eating chopped meat, I don't know what part of the meat is being served to me. Maybe I'm getting the part of these forbidden fats. Maybe there are unkosher animals in the forbidden animals in the kitchen, and it's being mixed together either by mistake or because I don't know what's going in the hamburger or something like that. So I would be very careful just for practical reasons, not because I have anything fundamentally against eating in, or not because I fundamentally believe that a restaurant has to have a kosher certificate from a rabbi or a rabbinical organization on it, but just because of the practical elements of eating in a restaurant that is not kosher. And again, as a vegetarian, it really mitigates a lot of these problems.
Sure.
But there still are problems. So, for instance, I don't generally eat French fries because I'm also kind of very very into healthy living. So I don't eat anything I'm trying to avoid seed oils, soy oil, and all this kind of stuff. So, but if I do go to a restaurant and order French fries, so that oil that they're deep frying the potatoes in, the French fries in, who knows what else they've deep fried in there, right? They could have deep fried shrimp in there. They could have deep fried, God knows what in there, right? So again, even if you're ordering vegetarian food, you don't know what's going on behind the scenes in the kitchen. And so I try to avoid. Generally, what I'll do is if I do eat at a restaurant that is not kosher certified, then I'll try to get cold food. So my favorite food when I'm back in the United States is lox and bagel. I don't know if you know what that is. I think everyone knows what that is in this day and age. Yeah. Right. So if I go to a non-kosher restaurant and I have lox and bagel and cream cheese, then nothing's cooked. I see exactly what's on my plate. I know it's a bagel. The bagel is going to be kosher. The lox is just salmon right out of the package. That's going to be kosher. Vegetables and so there's no problem there, right? And if it's some little tiny molecule of pig happened to fly into my locks, was wafting up in the kitchen and happened to fly on my locks, then that's not a big that's not a big deal. So
yeah, that's my perspective as well too, to be quite honest.
Right.
I do get that from the New Testament, because there's a couple of instances where Jesus says, you go and eat what's set before you.
Mhm.
Right. So I think, to me, it's not like, oh, eat the ham sandwich or the pork chop. He's telling them, don't hold people to this utmost crazy Pharisee standard of eating. Right.
Exactly.
So that's my understanding. Again, it's a completely undermining of rabbinic law.
Absolutely.
Because he's
Absolutely.
like, yeah,
it's much more straightforward. And I'll even give you an example. So many of the elements of rabbinical kashrut are completely irrelevant to me. So they'll separate dishes. They have separate meat dishes and separate dairy dishes. I'm sure you're aware of that. They will I guess it's not exactly kashrut per se, but on Passover, they'll take all of the dishes away and bring out special kosher for Passover dishes. I don't do that. There's no need to do that. Because they're afraid that the dishes had chametz, had leavened bread on it, so they want separate dishes for Passover. Again, I'm trying to think of most of the elements of rabbinical kashrut would be completely irrelevant to me. So much so, I'll give you an example that when I feed I have a couple of cats. When I feed the cats at night, then the cat food is completely unkosher. In fact, some of the cat food has sometimes shrimp in it, and I have no problem just using a regular metal spoon. I do use one of my regular metal spoons. I'll take the cat food out of it, dump it in the bowl for them, and I'll just wash the spoon, and I have no problem with that whatsoever, because there's no implication in there that after I've washed the spoon that somehow that spoon contaminated with the cooties from the unkosher food. Again, that's alluded to Leviticus 11, that certain types of vessels can contract the impurity or unkosherness, and others can't. And metal is not one of them. It's not porous. So, but a rabbinical Jew would never do anything like that. So it's basically I think, straightforward.
I think those impurities are specifically to the 8 species that's mentioned. I think it's the mole, the rat, and this kind of thing, right? It gives you like 8 specific species. I believe that only those 8 species, when it talks about the gecko, this and that only those are the ones that are going to contaminate a porous object, is if the animal actually dies in it, right? Not if you have like a lizard that walks by or that walks across your porous object. That's not going to kill it. I mean, that's not going to cause you to need to break it, right? It's going to be if an animal like that were to die in it. But back to like what you're saying, like if a minuscule transfer of pig were to happen, I'm kind of on the same page with you. Like I think that the Torah is very straightforward. It's like choose animals that are clean, and don't eat the animals that are not clean, right? Right. I think it's very easy, and then
just use common sense, common sense. I always like to say, so the rabbis, they always talk about the 613 commandments, which by the way is a made up number, but that's besides the point. But I use that as for my quip here, which is that I always say there's the 614th commandment, and that is use your common sense.
Yeah.
Simple as that,
Simple. Yeah. I have a question, because you said you're vegetarian. So, if a third temple were to be created or erected or whatever, I don't know however that worked, and we're observing Passover, would you eat the Passover lamb?
I would have to. I'd have no choice. I would follow the Torah, and that would trump my vegetarianism. But then again, and this is just kind of my own personal opinion. Yeah. My own personal opinion. I've actually heard this opinion put forth by certain rabbis, including, if I'm not mistaken, a rabbi named Avraham Yitzchak Cohen Cook, who was a very well-known rabbi, the kind of the founder of what's called the religious Zionist movement. That and I only mention him because it happens to be in line with my belief, not because I believe it because he mentioned it.
Sure.
But just to show that that this belief has been floating around. It's not a completely radical belief. I do believe that in the future that when this temple will be rebuilt, that there's a strong possibility that there will no longer be meat sacrifices, which gets to a whole other point, which is, I think, and this is maybe also somewhat a radical point of view, but I don't think it in any way, shape, or form contradicts the Torah. I think that it's very possible that once we've reestablished contact with God, with Yahweh, it's possible that he will issue I call it a Torah version 2.0, where he'll take some of the commandments that were really only meant to be temporary, such as commandments having to do with meat sacrifices, and kind of update, give it revised version of the Torah. So I always separate there are commandments in the Torah into those which I think are internal, such as 10 commandments: do not murder, do not steal, do not sleep with another man's wife, and so on and so forth. These are universal. These are eternal, with certain commandments that I think were products of their time rather than eternal. And I equate the meat sacrifices as something that was much more product of his time. And I know also the Rambam, another famous medieval rabbi, also had this point of view. So that's my personal opinion. But if the temple were to be rebuilt tomorrow, and this theoretical Torah version 2.0 had not been issued, then yes, I would be obliged to keep the Torah that we do have, and I would at that point eat the Passover sacrifice. But there are a couple of verses regarding this that I always like to point to, and one of them is Jeremiah, I believe it's chapter 16. Let me just find it here for a second. Let's see, I believe it's 16:15, if I'm not mistaken, thereabouts. Let me just open it up. Let's see, where is it? So, yes, it's Jeremiah chapter 16, starting in verse 14. However, days are coming, declares Yahweh, when it will no longer be said, as surely as Yahweh lives, who brought the Israelites up out of Egypt, but it will be said, as surely as Yahweh lives, who brought the Israelites up out of the land of the north and out of all of the countries where he had banished them, for I will restore them to the land I gave their ancestors. So the point here being that we now think of when we speak about Yahweh, we say Yahweh, the God who took the Israelites out of Egypt. But the miracles that will happen in the end of days, which are happening right now, the ingathering of the exiles, will be so great that Yahweh will then be remembered for that, and I won't say forgotten, but what he had done in the past, bringing Israel out of Egypt, will pale in comparison. Will kind of fade into the background. So we see that's an indication right there that we're not dealing. Yahweh he's not a dead, static God. He's the living God, and he's constantly doing new things for humanity, and so therefore the idea that every single one of the laws that we see in the Torah, which was written in a very specific cultural context and historical context, the idea that every single one of them has relevance in the future, or in the current times, and in the future, I think is a mistake. We see that Yahweh is constantly doing new things and changing, not because he's changing, but because humanity is changing, and so he's updating certain laws in accordance with where humanity is standing at that particular time. So
I agree there. I think that there's going to be that. We see hints that we're going to be what I would call a divine reversal, right, of the Edenic curse. It kind of undoes that curse, and we essentially seem to return to Eden. Right. At least the concept of it in concept. I mean, you see it in Isaiah 11, right? I'll let you pull it up if you like. Isaiah 11,
sure.
6. Isaiah 11:6 says, "And the wolf also shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid, and the calf, and the young lion, and the fatling together, and the little child shall lead them."
Right.
So it sure sounds like things have changed, right? And so I agree with you. It seems like things will change. And there's a concept like that in the New Testament, where, when Yeshua says in the very famous statement that us Torah believers kind of use to show people that he taught the Torah, says, until heaven and earth pass away, not a jot or tittle will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Then in the book of Revelation, it says, lo, I see a new heaven and a new earth, meaning that there's something new that happened, right? And I think like what the author is saying is similar to this concept in Isaiah 11, right? When everything is restored, we will be back to the a more Edenic lifestyle, right. And that might consist of no meat, right? And that's fine, that's all good. But for right now, I would say that we're still kind of in that in before that, right? So I agree, and I think we're probably gonna be on the same page here. Where like if someone, like I know a lot of people that have taken that the concept that I just talked about and said, well, therefore you must not eat meat. And I'm like, no, I don't think the Bible is saying that. Like I see where you're going with it. I get it, but that doesn't mean that it's like a thou shalt therefore no longer eat meat. Because like you stated, the Passover seems to be something that we're supposed to keep. Like even if there was all the things in place right now, I'd be keeping the Passover. I feel like if I were if I were to sin, I'd bring a sin offering if I was in the land of Israel. So that not a jot or tittle, I believe, would pass from the Torah.
I agree with you. And when Yahweh wants to make his will known, if he wants to change certain things, he will make his will known. And until then, what we have right now is the current written text of the Torah, and I agree with you 100% that until further notice, we're required to keep it. And maybe he won't come down and issue version 2.0, and that's fine. We'll keep this one. But I do feel deep in my heart that again, that many of these commandments were meant to be for a certain period of time, and I do think there will be a revision, so to speak. But that's up to him, and it would have to be done through proper channels with a recognized prophet that is speaking in his name, and so we'll have to wait and see what happens. But that's just my personal opinion. And it's not as radical as it sounds. It's not a lone opinion. There are, as I mentioned, other figures that have believed similar ideas. So at any rate,
the prophets are saying that. The prophets are saying that in Tanakh too, right?
Yep, exactly, like the example that you brought in Isaiah. So I think we should start wrapping up here because it is getting a bit late here. It's almost 11 o'clock p.m.
Sure.
So, George, I'll let you say some final words.
Melech, I really appreciate this time. I thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. I really enjoyed having this conversation, and honestly, like I could probably do this for hours and hours talking about just the Torah and how to observe it, because I have this love for the Torah, and I don't have a love for my doctrine and my interpretation. I have a love for trying to understand what God wants. And I believe that the best way to do it is iron sharpening iron, right? And the best way to do it is having these conversations and learning from each other. I may implement something that you do because it seems logical and aligns with the text better than what I currently do. And you never know. I may implement that for a season or may not, and then and change it, right? But I love the Torah to the point where I think that these conversations are invaluable. We have limited amount of time here on earth, and this is much appreciated time together. So I appreciate for the time here.
Same here. And the feelings is absolutely mutual. And I could say the same thing back. I enjoy very much having these conversations, and I really try to listen to what the other people are saying. And from every conversation that I have, I always learn something new, and I've definitely learned some new things from you today. So for instance, the lo tevashel, not cooking the kid in its mother's milk. I will definitely keep an eye out for that third potential interpretation that you gave. That's just an example, but I have very much enjoyed our conversation, learned a lot, and felt it was very productive. So I thank you very much for doing it, and hopefully we'll do it again in the future at some point.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
You got it. All right, George. You have a nice day.
Shalom.
Shalom, shalom. Bye-bye.
שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך, יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך, יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך, יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. אוי 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 אוי, שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, אוי מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, אוי 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 אוי, שיר